everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of fashion and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Today I'm back discussing an unsolved case that has gone unsolved for so many years now. It's been a huge mystery for a number of years and has puzzled a lot of people. We're going to be discussing the mysterious murder of Julia Wallace. Before we get started, I'm just going to zoom through my regular disclaimer that I like to include at the start of all my videos, just letting you guys know that I'm not claiming to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases I cover over on my channel. I'm simply relaying the information I'm able to find myself through researching certain sources on the internet, and because only certain things are accessible to me, it means I may get things wrong, leave things out or mispronounce things, and I apologise if I do any of those things. I'm not trying to do anyone any harm or an injustice. I'm simply working with the information that I have available to me. So with all that being said, we should just go ahead and get started discussing the case of Julia Wallace. It has literally just started raining, so I apologise if at any point in the background you can hear like raindrops. Hopefully it won't get too loud and hopefully it won't distract you. Julia Wallace was born in the year of 1861 under the name Julia Dennis. There is very little information online regarding her early life and her interests and things like that, and that's likely due to the time in which this case took place and the time in which she was born and lived. But there is a lot of interest around her husband William specifically, and as I go further into the video you'll understand a little bit more why. William Herbert Wallace was born in a place called Cumberland in the UK in the year of 1878, and he spent much of his life training to be a draper. Through my research I could kind of attempt to narrow down this job description of being a draper to being someone who specialises in buying and selling of cloth overseas. His training in this area took him to a number of different places around the world, including China and India, but in the year of 1907 he decided it was time to move back home to England after he had been suffering from quite a few different health-related issues during his travels abroad. His next career prospect came about in the year of 1911 when he was employed to work under the political Liberal Party in Harrogate, and he worked his way up through the organisation. And it was in Harrogate that he first met Julia Dennis, and the two would very soon become wed. The First World War saw a number of drastic changes within the country's institutions, and the one that impacted the young couple the most had been in relation to the changes to political position. William Wallace was soon informed that his position working as a Liberal election agent was no longer a required position and he was hereby unemployed. In the year of 1915, the couple then decided to move to Liverpool in order to follow up on a job prospect that had been provided to William by his father, and this is where they remained for some years. William at this point had found some sense of employment stability as he was working as a collections agent in the area, as well as lecturing and teaching part-time in a nearby college. Julia's case takes place on the 20th of January in the year of 1931 in the evening time. William had arrived at his home on Wolverton Street for the evening when he found himself struggling to enter both the front and the back door to his house. Some neighbours of his, the Johnstons, had found him out in the alley outside of his home, and they'd struck up a conversation, and this is when he told them that he was having issues getting inside his own home. The Johnstons actually had the spare key to their home since they were their neighbours, so they kind of gave him this key in any case of emergency. So they told him, try the back door again, and then if you still can't get in while we're here, we'll run back and grab the key and help you in your home. And so with the Johnston couple as witnesses, he tried the back door again, which had been previously locked, but this time the door opened. William and the Johnstons entered his home through the back door, and they began to make their way through the house in search of Julia, who'd been at home that evening. And it was in the living room of their home that they found Julia's body. Julia had been found lying on the floor, and she'd appeared to have been very brutally attacked. And it was one of the neighbours who had taken charge in this traumatic event. He had told his wife and William to stay where they were and to not touch anything while he ran out to fetch a doctor and some police. In a later post-mortem carried out, it was determined that she'd been hit over the head a total of 11 times using a blunt object and extreme force, and the crushing of her skull as a result of these blows had been her cause of death. Very quickly, William Wallace became the prime suspect in the murder of his wife. Police had initially questioned him on his whereabouts in the lead up to the discovery of his wife's remains, and according to him, it had all begun the day before on January the 19th. William claims that he'd spent the entire day at something called the Liverpool Chess Club where he was a member, and then at some point in the evening of January the 19th, while he was still at the chess club, a senior member had informed him that there was a phone call placed to the club asking for William, and they'd left a message. The message simply stated that a man by the name of R.M. Qualtrough, I apologise if I mispronounced that, was looking to buy an insurance policy from him since that was his job, and he invited William to his house the following evening to discuss the sale further. So the address that had been given to William, that was allegedly the home of this R.M. Qualtrough, was a 25 Menlove Gardens East. However, this address did not actually exist. But he wasn't aware of this fact, and so the following evening he left his home, jumped on a tram and headed straight for where he believed the address was. Initially, when he couldn't find the listed address, he'd put it down to a manual error, so he thought perhaps the person who had taken the message had written it down incorrectly and that it was likely one of the houses that was on the street that he was on. But when he still couldn't find anything remotely matching it, he decided to begin asking police officers and anyone working in the area, any residents, if they knew of this R.M. Qualtrough and where he could be living. And William claims he continued his search for around 45 minutes before realising that the search was fruitless and he would give up and head home. And this then takes us to the point where he was found trying to get into his own house and struggling to enter the front and the back doors. Despite this story seeming relatively plausible and suggesting that someone else had some involvement in Julia's death, police were very swiftly building a case against him as they seemed adamant from the get-go that William Wallace was guilty of this murder. It was discovered by law enforcement that there had been a call placed to the chess club that day, as William had said. However, they claimed that what they discovered was that this call had been placed from a payphone that was located just down the road from the Wallace family home. Once police had learned of this fact, they began to theorise that it was actually William himself who had placed this phone call to the chess club after having successfully snuck out at some point before returning, as this would provide him with some sort of support for his alibi. So it seemed to be, at this point, a popular belief that William was guilty of murdering his own wife. Within 2 weeks, an alleged strong case had been built up against William Wallace, and he was charged with the murder of Julia Wallace. He was placed on trial in front of a jury where he consistently claimed his innocence, and he remained certain of his alibi of that night. But after only an hour of deliberation, which a lot of people have stated that only an hour for a jury to deliberate is a very short period of time for them to make a solid decision, it was announced that the jury found William guilty of his wife's murder. And from this guilty verdict, William Wallace was given a death sentence for his alleged crimes. William had been so sure of his innocence at this point that his sentencing had been completely and extremely unexpected to him, and so he immediately began to enlist the help of more and more lawyers in order to make an appeal against the case and his sentencing. William's team were able to begin picking apart the arguments that had initially been made by the prosecution during the trial. This included a statement provided by a person working at the chess club on the day prior to Julia's death, who'd been the one to answer the phone call on that day. This person had told the defence that they were certain it hadn't been William's voice on the other end of the phone, and they didn't believe that he had made the phone call himself. In addition to this, the sheer violence of the attack on Julia would have likely meant that whoever had attacked her would have some indication of the attack on them, i.e. they would have either had a little bit of blood splatter on their clothes, or they would have most likely been absolutely drenched in blood when they left the home. And because of the timeline in terms of the call being placed the night before Julia's death, it would have suggested that he had already pre-planned this and he'd thought this entire plan out months in advance, and that he was planning this attack on his wife. It just seems unlikely that if all of this is the case, that William would have been able to brutally attack his wife and then hurriedly leave his house to catch a tram to find this mysterious address that didn't exist, while also having time to clean himself, change his clothes and dispose of them so that they would never be recovered. William's team had also noted the extent of his health conditions at the time. As I said, earlier on in his life he moved to the UK permanently because of a number of ailments that he was struggling with, and at the time of Julia's death he did have a lot of serious health conditions and all in all just physical limitations. That meant that he wasn't anywhere near as energetic as a typical person might be, and so this proposed scenario would have taken him even longer to successfully carry out. Their most convincing evidence, though, came in the form of a young boy who had been working as a milk delivery boy on the day of the murder. This boy claims he had spoken to Julia Wallace alive and well just mere minutes before the tram that William had caught in search of this R.M. Qualtrough's address had left its station, and so this boy claims to have seen her alive and well after he'd already left the house. So if this is entirely true, it argues the fact that William physically could not be in two places at once. As a result of this compelling appeal, his sentencing and conviction were overturned completely, and he was released from custody due to the fact that there was just not enough evidence to be able to conclusively prove he was guilty. And William was able to return to his life as a free man, but he sadly died just 2 years after the death of his wife as a result of his ever-deteriorating health condition. There remained no other suspects in relation to the murder of Julia Wallace for some years, likely due to the fact that law enforcement's entire efforts from the start in their building of the case had been focused on proving that William Wallace had been guilty rather than just looking for evidence in general. And then in the year of 1969, another possible suspect in the case was publicly mentioned in a book written by a man named Jonathan Goodman that went into detail about the entire case. However, he did not specify a name. The author essentially wrote about how his research indicated knowledge of a man that was a co-worker of William Wallace's had been Julia's killer. He decided to keep the name private to avoid any possible legal action made against him, since there was currently no legal indication. There was no case made by the police that was currently being built against him to make it seem as though he was going to be convicted or arrested. But 15 years later, another book covering the case, written by Roger Wilkes, went on to name this man as Richard Gordon Parry. According to this author, Parry had been included as a suspect in the early investigation in the immediate years following Julia's case, but had been cleared of suspicion after his fiancée had told investigators she had been with him at the time of Julia's murder. This woman's name was Lily Lloyd, and she would later publicly recant this statement, acting as Parry's alibi by claiming that she had in fact not been with him at the time of Julia's murder. It's hard to conclusively state the reliability of either of this woman's statements, because it isn't unheard of for spouses to provide a false alibi for their partner in relation like this. It happens in a lot of cases. But also, she had only gone on to recant and take back this alibi after Parry had ended their relationship. So some have argued that perhaps his alibi was in fact true, and she'd only gone on to recant this statement because she was hurt by him ending their relationship. So we really cannot know for sure which one of her statements was true. Some sources also mention the existence of some potentially incriminating evidence relating to this suspect. On the night Julia Wallace died, Parry had allegedly taken his car out to be washed, and someone working on washing the car had allegedly seen something inside the car that would later turn out to be a glove covered in blood. This person had apparently told the police of this at the time, but they claimed that the police either failed to consider this as being related to Julia's death in any way, or they intentionally covered up the witnesses' account due to them being convinced of William Wallace's guilt at the time. The main question related to the naming of this potential suspect had been regarding what his motive would have been for murdering Julia Wallace. As I said previously, Richard Gordon Parry had been a co-worker of William's, and so they were familiar with each other. They were known to spend time together. Some have speculated the possibility of Richard having gained entry to the home as Julia had welcomed him in, since she knew who he was, and he had the intention of entering the home to rob it. Due to the nature of William's job, he had a number of valuable documents and items inside his home, and so it could be that Julia had caught this man trying to steal some of their valuables, and he had attacked her as a result. The main argument against this scenario is that if this were the case, the entire house would have likely been cleaned out of all of its valuables. However, nothing seemed to be missing, so this doesn't seem like it was the case. There is also the speculated possibility of the pair having been involved in an affair. So possibly she had wanted to tell her husband of her affair, but Parry had attacked her in order to keep her quiet. There was also quite a large age difference between the pair, as Parry was only 22 years old at the time and Julia was quite a few years older. There is also a mention in some sources of a possible motive having been revenge related after William had allegedly reported Parry to their employer after discovering that Parry had done something incorrectly, quite significantly wrong in their job, involving some payments from clients that he had reported as having been received but hadn't actually been paid to them. I couldn't find a lot of detail regarding this claim, so I would take it with a pinch of salt because I don't know how reliable it is, although if it were true, it doesn't really seem like there was a hugely drastic outcome if he had reported him for this mistake, as Parry had continued to work for this company for over a year after all this occurred, so it's not like he was reprimanded because of this mistake to the point where he lost his job, and this would have then triggered him to want to seek revenge on William. I think there remains a lot of doubt regarding Parry as a suspect, simply because there may be a number of plausible scenarios in which there is a motive for him attacking Julia, but none of them appear to have anything substantial to support them. This, combined with the amount of effort he would have had to have gone to in order to carry out the murder, including the phone call and knowing of William's whereabouts, there seems to be lacking any convincing evidence really that would explain why he would go through all of that. I also did wonder, I'm not sure if maybe it's just something that happened to miss through my research or whether it's just never really been addressed, but what is the explanation behind the back door being locked the first time that William tried to open it and then suddenly being unlocked the second time he tried in front of his neighbours? So I'd definitely be interested on hearing your guys' thoughts on that one. The focus has more recently fallen on the neighbours of the Wallaces, the Johnstons, who I mentioned earlier as being the ones who discovered Julia's body with William. Their names were Jack and Florence Johnston, and the focus fell on them when an author researching this case made the claim that Jack had allegedly confessed to Julia's murder on his deathbed. Allegedly, the couple had made plans to rob their neighbour's home in the months leading up to the murder, with it beginning with them stealing their pet cat and using it later as a lure. They had organised the phone call in order to ensure William was out of the home, and then they had plans to get Julia out of the home, with Florence telling her that she found her pet cat and she should come and help her return the cat. While the house was empty, Jack would enter the home using the spare key that they'd been entrusted with previously and rob a number of their valuables. And this plan had allegedly changed when, on the day that they were supposed to do all of this, they both believed that they had seen Julia leave the house with William, and so they both entered using their key, only to come face to face with Julia sitting in the living room. In this proposed scenario, Julia had died as a result of a panicked attack at the hands of Jack Johnston. One factor that makes this scenario more possible is that the couple moved out of their home the very next day after Julia's death, and they moved in with their adult daughter, something that seemed very unusual and very sudden. And so some people have taken this as a sign of guilt and an attempt to hide from any possible accusations by being nearby, while others argue that it may simply be out of fear. I know I wouldn't want to live next door to a house where someone randomly broken in and attacked the wife while she was home alone. So some people said this could have been a motive, that they just wanted to get out of this dangerous situation. Family members of the Johnston couple had also argued that the move had allegedly been planned for quite some time before this, and so it was just a mere coincidence that it happened around the same time. And they had also allegedly stated that this confession didn't ever actually occur, as a family member of Jack's was always with him while he was on his deathbed. It was never left alone with anyone, and so they never heard this confession coming out of his mouth. All in all, this is a very, very strange case, and I'm sure you guys can understand why this case is sometimes referred to as the impossible murder, because every explored, possible, considered avenue just seems to not really have a lot of evidence behind it. So I'd definitely be interested in hearing your guys' thoughts down below. I know there is a lot of information out there on the internet, so you guys can probably go down some rabbit hole and find a lot of theories. It's such an old case and it's a very, very discussed case. So let me know all of your thoughts and everything down below in the comments. I hope you guys found this interesting. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.